Have you ever noticed how some people can speak with such conviction, such apparent sincerity, that you find yourself nodding along even when something deep within you whispers that their words ring hollow? Have you observed how certain individuals can craft their questions so skillfully that you reveal more than you intended, while they remain hidden behind a veil of false curiosity? The ancient sage Confucius understood this phenomenon well, for he lived in times when the art of deception was as refined as it is today, though perhaps more direct in its application. In the courts of ancient rulers and among the merchants in bustling marketplaces, those who mastered the craft of dishonesty knew that the most effective lies were not bold proclamations, but carefully constructed inquiries. They understood that a question, unlike a statement, appears innocent on its surface. It seems to seek knowledge rather than impose falsehood. Yet within certain questions lies a trap more sophisticated than any net ever woven by human hands. Confucius taught that the cultivation of virtue begins with the recognition of vice, and that wisdom emerges not from avoiding the darkness, but from learning to see clearly within it. He knew that those who would deceive others often reveal their nature through the very questions they choose to ask. For just as a tree is known by its fruit, a person's character can be discerned by the manner in which they seek information from others. The master once observed that when we interact with those whose hearts are not aligned with righteousness, we must develop the ability to hear not only what is spoken, but what lies beneath the words. This requires a cultivation of inner stillness, a harmony between our natural intuition and our reasoned judgment. For when these two forces work in concert within us, we become capable of recognizing the subtle patterns that reveal a speaker's true intentions. Consider how a genuine seeker of knowledge approaches another person. Their questions flow from sincere curiosity, from a desire to understand or to help. There is an openness in their inquiry, a willingness to receive whatever answer comes, whether it serves their immediate purpose or not. They ask because they truly wish to know, and in their asking, there is a quality of respect for both the question and the one who might provide the answer. But observe carefully those whose questions carry a different quality, those whose inquiries seem designed not to illuminate truth, but to serve some hidden agenda. These individuals have learned to use questions as tools of manipulation, as instruments to extract what they need while appearing to offer something in return. They have discovered that people are more likely to trust someone who asks than someone who simply takes. The first of these deceptive patterns reveals itself in questions that seem to offer validation, while actually seeking to exploit your need for recognition. The dishonest person learns quickly that most individuals carry within them a deep hunger to be seen, to be acknowledged for their worth and their accomplishments. They craft questions that appear to celebrate your success, while actually probing for information they can later use to their advantage. When someone approaches you with inquiries that seem designed primarily to make you feel important, to encourage you to speak at length about your achievements or your knowledge, examine their motive carefully. A true friend celebrates your success without needing to understand its every detail. A genuine colleague acknowledges your expertise without requiring you to prove it through lengthy explanation. But those who would use your accomplishments for their own purposes must first map the territory of your capabilities and your pride. The second pattern emerges in questions that create artificial urgency or pressure around your decision-making process. The deceiver understands that when people feel rushed, when they believe they must choose quickly or lose an opportunity, their judgment becomes clouded. They ask questions that imply scarcity, that suggest time is running short, that create the illusion that careful consideration is somehow a luxury you cannot afford. Watch for those who approach you with inquiries about your availability, your timeline, your competing priorities, not out of respect for your circumstances, but as a way to identify the pressure points they can later exploit. They seek to understand not what would truly serve your best interests, but rather when and how you might be most vulnerable to making decisions that serve theirs. The third deceptive pattern appears in questions that seem to seek your advice while actually attempting to plant ideas in your mind. These individuals have learned that people are more likely to embrace a concept if they believe they arrived at it through their own reasoning. So they ask questions that guide your thinking down a predetermined path, that lead you to conclusions they have already reached, while making you feel as though the wisdom emerged from your own reflection. Such questioners often begin with broad inquiries about your opinions on general topics, then gradually narrow their focus, using your own words and values to construct arguments for whatever they hope to convince you to accept. They quote your earlier statements back to you, not to honor your wisdom, but to create the impression that their proposal aligns perfectly with your existing beliefs. The fourth pattern manifests in questions that probe your relationships, your loyalties, your connections to others. The dishonest person understands that knowledge of your social bonds can become a powerful tool for influence. They ask about your family, your closest friends, your professional relationships, not out of genuine interest in your life, but to map the network of people who matter to you. They seek to understand who holds your trust, who could vouch for them in your eyes, who might serve as a channel for future manipulation. They listen carefully to how you speak of others, noting your frustrations, your admiration, your dependencies. This information becomes currency in their hands, something they can spend later to gain credibility or create leverage. The fifth and perhaps most subtle pattern emerges in questions that seem to acknowledge your intelligence and discernment while actually testing the boundaries of your skepticism. These individuals need to understand how much scrutiny their proposals will face, how deeply you examine the motives of others, what level of proof you require before extending your trust. They ask you about past experiences, where you felt deceived, about how you typically evaluate new opportunities, about what warning signs you watch for in your dealings with others. They present themselves as equally cautious, equally wise, sharing their own supposed strategies for avoiding deception. Yet all the while, they are gathering intelligence about your defenses, learning exactly what mask they need to wear to slip past your natural caution. Confucius taught that the cultivation of wisdom requires us to develop both compassion and discernment, to maintain an open heart without abandoning our capacity for careful judgment. This balance becomes essential when we encounter those who would use our openness against us. We must learn to recognize these patterns, not to become cynical or closed, but to preserve our ability to offer genuine trust to those who truly deserve it. The recognition of these patterns marks only the beginning of true understanding. For Confucius knew that wisdom without application remains merely clever observation, and knowledge without virtue becomes nothing more than sophisticated foolishness. The sage must not only see clearly, but must also know how to respond when confronted with those whose hearts have turned away from the way. When you encounter someone whose questions follow these deceptive patterns, your first impulse may be to withdraw completely, to close your heart and refuse all engagement. Yet this response, while understandable, abandons the path of virtue that leads to true strength. The Master taught that we must neither become naive nor allow ourselves to grow bitter, for both extremes remove us from the balanced center where wisdom dwells. Consider instead the approach of the skilled gardener who encounters weeds among the precious plants. The gardener does not abandon the entire garden, nor does he pretend the weeds are flowers. Instead, he develops the ability to distinguish between what nourishes and what depletes, tending each according to its nature. So too must we learn to engage with different types of people according to their true character, offering what is appropriate while protecting what is sacred. When faced with questions designed to extract validation for hidden purposes, respond with the dignity of one who knows their own worth. Share what you choose to share, but not because you seek their approval. Speak of your accomplishments if it serves a worthy purpose, but do not feel compelled to prove your value to those who approach you with hungry eyes. The person of virtue understands that true recognition comes from righteous action, not from the flattery of those who would use your pride as a doorway to your resources. If someone creates false urgency around your decisions, remember that the wise ruler never makes important choices in haste. Time, when used properly, is the ally of good judgment. Those who would rush you into action before you can consider all aspects of a situation reveal their fear that careful examination would expose the flaws in their proposal. Grant yourself the space to reflect, to consult with trusted advisors, to examine how their request aligns with your deeper values and long-term well-being. When confronted with questions that attempt to plant ideas while appearing to seek your counsel, recognize this as a corruption of the sacred relationship between teacher and student. True learning occurs when the student approaches with genuine humility and the teacher responds with genuine wisdom. But when someone poses as a student while actually serving as a manipulator, they violate this ancient trust. Listen to their questions with attention, but notice whether they truly hear your answers or merely wait for you to say what they hope to hear. The protection of your relationships requires particular care, for these bonds represent some of life's most precious treasures. When someone probes deeply into your connections with family, friends, and colleagues, consider their motive carefully. A genuine friend might ask about your loved ones out of sincere interest in your happiness and well-being. But those who map your relationships like merchants calculating trade routes seek to understand not how to honor these bonds, but how to exploit them. Guard the sacred trust that others have placed in you. Do not speak carelessly of your family's private struggles, your friends' confidential fears, or your colleagues' unguarded moments of doubt. These revelations, once shared with the wrong person, can become weapons turned against those you care about most. The person of virtue understands that loyalty is not merely about grand gestures in moments of crisis, but about the daily discipline of protecting what has been entrusted to your care. Perhaps most challenging of all is recognizing when someone tests the boundaries of your discernment while appearing to share your commitment to wisdom. These individuals have learned that the most effective deception often comes disguised as mutual understanding. They speak of their own supposed caution, their careful evaluation of others, their commitment to virtue, all while studying your reactions to determine exactly what approach will succeed with you. When someone claims to share your values while simultaneously probing for your vulnerabilities, pay attention to the subtle inconsistencies between their words and their actions. Do their questions truly seek to understand your perspective, or do they guide you toward revealing information they can later use? Does their apparent admiration for your wisdom lead them to respect your boundaries, or does it encourage them to push harder against your resistance? The cultivation of proper response to such individuals requires what Confucius called the rectification of names, the practice of calling things by their true nature rather than by their pleasing appearances. When someone approaches you with honeyed words but bitter intentions, do not pretend their sweetness is genuine simply because acknowledging their bitterness would be uncomfortable. Truth, even when it disturbs our peace, serves us better than illusion, even when it flatters our pride. Yet this recognition must not lead to hardness of heart or cynical suspicion of all human interaction. The Way teaches us that virtue lies in the harmonious balance between opposing forces, between openness and caution, between trust and prudence, between compassion and discernment. We must develop the ability to remain genuinely warm toward those who deserve warmth, while maintaining appropriate distance from those who would abuse our openness. This balance requires constant cultivation, like the musician who must tune their instrument before each performance, or the scholar who must sharpen their mind through daily study. We cannot achieve this wisdom once and then rest in our accomplishment. Instead, we must approach each encounter with fresh attention, allowing our experience to inform our judgment without permitting past hurts to close our hearts to present possibilities. The person who has learned to recognize deceptive questions while maintaining their own integrity becomes a source of stability in a world where many people have lost their way. They offer genuine seekers the gift of authentic relationship, while denying manipulators the easy victories they seek. In doing so, they serve not only their own well-being, but the greater harmony that emerges when virtue is properly cultivated and wisely applied. Remember that the ancient masters understood something profound about human nature that remains as true today as it was in their time. They knew that when we encounter those who would deceive us, our response reveals as much about our own character as their questions reveal about theirs. The person who meets dishonesty with wisdom demonstrates that virtue can flourish even in the presence of vice, just as a strong tree can grow in rocky soil if its roots run deep enough. When you find yourself in the presence of someone whose questions carry these deceptive patterns, observe your own heart carefully. Does anger arise? Does fear take hold? Does pride whisper that you must prove your superiority over their cunning? These responses, while natural, can lead you away from the path of virtue if you allow them to guide your actions. The superior person learns to feel these emotions without being ruled by them, to acknowledge their presence while choosing a response that serves the greater harmony. The practice of maintaining inner stillness while engaging with deceptive individuals requires what the ancients called the cultivation of the gentleman's heart. This does not mean becoming passive or allowing yourself to be exploited. Rather, it means developing the strength to respond from a place of centered wisdom, rather than reactive emotion. When someone asks you questions designed to manipulate, you need not answer with elaborate explanations of why you refuse to be deceived. Your actions, guided by virtue, will speak more clearly than any words. The path of wisdom is not walked once, but traveled daily, each step revealing new depths of understanding about the human heart and its capacity for both virtue and deception. When you encounter those 5 patterns of dishonest inquiry, remember that your recognition of them is itself a victory of virtue over cunning. You have developed the discernment that allows you to see clearly while maintaining the compassion that keeps your heart open to genuine connection. This balance, this harmony between wisdom and benevolence, is what the ancients meant when they spoke of walking the way. Carry this knowledge not as a weapon against the world, but as a lantern that illuminates the path toward authentic relationships built on trust, respect, and mutual virtue.